Hello, Space Pirates and Star Children. My name is TB Skyen, and there's a new animated short coming out from League of Legends, specifically to promote a alternate universe line of skins called the Odyssey skins. It is Jinx, Yasuo, Malphite, Ziggs, Kayn, and Sona. I don't think I forgot anyone there. We've been getting these skins that are set in this highly colorful, very cartoony, more fantasy than sci-fi, but nonetheless still space opera adventure universe. Now, when I first saw this short, my immediate thoughts drifted towards WildStar, which is an MMO that you may or may not have heard of, but it's an MMO that had very much the same comic sensibility, very much the same design aesthetic, this very bright, colorful universe, set in a sci-fi world with lots of, you know, tentacle plant monsters and stuff like that. That never really took off, but if you, I would actually recommend, before you watch the rest of this video, go and watch the, at least some of the WildStar shorts. You can essentially just, search on Google, YouTube for WildStar Flicks, that's F-L-I-C-K-S, and you will find, like, the animated shorts they put out. They had very much the same kind of sensibility, as relates to a sort of, sci-fi fantasy universe as these ones have, and very much the same comedic sensibility. However, this is not at all new. In fact, the first thing I remember seeing that kind of fit into this mold of comedy space opera that's sort of much more space opera than hard sci-fi is a game called Zed from way back in the 90s. It was an RTS with robots that were like, it was funny because they were robots, but they were also like American college bro types that drank beer and burped at stuff and like, but that was the first time I remembered seeing something that had that kind of space western aesthetic to it going on, which then since then has been expanded upon by like multiple games, multiple different properties. I believe Firefly kind of fits into this as well, but which became extremely, extremely mainstream with the advent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Guardians of the Galaxy in particular, and Thor Ragnarok following up on it later on down the line. And that seems to be the sort of the aesthetic context that these particular characters, this particular visual universe is placing itself within. Like, it is very much trying to remind you of those things, trying to do its own League of Legends inspired take on those aesthetic ideas. And for my money, it works really well. Although I still, every time I see this thing, I cannot get out of my head that this is like the last WildStar flick from Carbine Studios before they shut down the servers for the game for good. Which was a pity. It was a fun game, although like I was never into MMOs, so I never really got super into the game, but it had a really fun universe and aesthetic. Anyway, that's not really what we're here to talk about. This short in particular, I believe, was made in collaboration with Blur Animation Studios, who have done a number of other pieces of animation for Riot before. They did not do the Rise short. I believe the Rise short was a completely internal production at Riot, which is part of the reason why it took it so long to come out. But Blur Studios have done a lot of work for Riot already, and honestly, they do really good quality work. I believe, actually, the original Get Jinxed might have been done in collaboration with Blur Studios as well. I would not be surprised. So, the short itself does something from a storytelling perspective that is really quite clever when it comes to universes like this, and that is it immediately places you into a highly, extremely subjective perspective. Now, think of how you introduce a space opera usually. Star Wars has a interesting solution to the problem of how the hell do you explain a universe like that to people so that they can understand more or less what the hell is going on. What Star Wars does, of course, is it has the iconic opening crawl, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and then episode whatever, and then you get this long text crawl just kind of setting up the situation that here's the bad guys, here are the good guys, there's this conflict. As the story opens, we're panning down to a planet where someone is landing because they're on some kind of a mission. Stakes established, we understand what the story is about, go on. And that's something that's kind of necessary when you have these high-concept space fantasy universes, is that you need some sort of an entry point for people to begin to understand the expectations that they're supposed to have here. Like, that's the same reason that Star Trek does the Stardate, our ongoing mission to find and discover new things and so on. Like, all of that is about managing the audience's expectations of what's actually going to be going on here. And what this short does is it tells us right away that this is not hard sci-fi, because the first thing we see is old footage of Malphite's birthday as he's about to eat a cake that has then subsequently been taped over by Jinx, who is a terrible camera person, who's just an absolutely terrible camera person. I believe that is not really super insulting to say. She cannot keep a thing consistent in frame. She can never ever align a camera correctly with horizon line, so everything is always a little bit off kilter and tilted, which is, you know, again, appropriate. And this is what I mean by the story drops us into a subjective perspective, because we have two subjective perspectives overlapping with each other here. First of all, we have Jinx's perspective as the camera person and as the on-camera personality, and indeed as the protagonist, as it were, of the short itself. And then as the short draws to a close, we have a secondary protagonist, the person through whose eyes we have been seeing all of this, in fact. We thought the person whose eyes we were seeing things through is Jinx, but it's not. It turns out to be Sona. Poor Sona, who has clearly been wrapped up in something that she's not quite ready to deal with. And I really do love the use of color in this shot in particular. See how, like, Malphite is blue, which gives him a little bit of affinity with Sona, but almost everything else in the shot, everywhere around her, is mostly tinged with red, orange, like lots of warm colors, and there she sits with gold and teal, standing out like a sore thumb. It's just like, from a shot compositional perspective, this is just really well done. Anyway, she is the audience POV character, actually, is what we get revealed to us right at the end. The person who does not understand anything about what the hell is going on. But up until the point where we're revealed to be looking through the eyes of Sona, we are seeing the Odyssey, the crew, the stakes of the universe, the things that are going on, entirely through Jinx's perspective, because she's the one holding the camera, she's the one delivering the monologue. And the reason this is clever is because, oh, of course we're not going to get an introduction to the history, we're not going to get an introduction to the story on all the important, like, how does the magic of this universe work, and why can they travel faster than light, and how the hell does a warp engine work? Of course we're not going to get any of that, because Jinx doesn't care about it. This is her perspective. And so the short very cleverly focuses 100% on character relationships. Like, there's practically nothing else going on in this short at all than setting up character relationships, and it begins at moment one. And the subreddit had one of its very rare, salient observations about this short, that Malphite displays more personality in the 2 seconds that he's on screen at the start of this thing than he has done during his entire 10 years as League of Legends champion so far, which is harsh, but also completely true. Like, there's so much personality to Malphite here, and that is the defining factor that's going on here, because Jinx is the one controlling the camera, because she's the one introducing the crew, because she's the one who's introducing us to the universe, she focuses on her relationship with these characters, and we see that established right away here, where Malphite is happily blowing on his little trumpet thing there with a little party hat on his head, which is just disgustingly adorable. And it's Jinx who hands him a cake, like, who goes, "Happy birthday, big guy," and hands him a cake. So we immediately get the sense of what their relationship is like, that Jinx has a lot of affection for Malphite, that she really does like him, that she likes to throw a birthday party for him, and that Malphite in turn likes Jinx a lot. And that immediately there's a character relationship being established here, which is a lovely thing. Then we get introduced to Jinx herself. And again, the camera is acting almost as a character in this short, because see what happens when the first thing we see of Jinx is a completely out of focus shot of her being way too close to the camera, and then it pulls back, and then she puts it at a terrible angle, like a completely terrible Dutch angle, because she's a terrible camera person, and she just goes, "Yeah, this is perfectly excellent and acceptable camera work." And so what this tells us right away is something about Jinx's personality and her state of mind, is that she's someone, she doesn't really sweat the details, she doesn't really care that much, she'll just plonk the camera down. Okay, stuff is more or less in frame, plonk the camera down, start talking, start doing stuff, start kicking things out of frame. And so Jinx's personality is established almost immediately. And of course, if you're already familiar with Jinx, none of what she does or says is really going to come as much of a surprise, but it does tell you something about how that aspect of her personality relates to the sci-fi universe in which she's finding herself. And there's all kinds of clever little details. For example, Jinx is really bad at green screening. Oh, well, more specifically, I suppose I should say she's bad at chroma keying. As she pulls the green screen and tries to chroma, you know, in a space background there, you can see that she's done an absolutely terrible job of separating things out to the point where it's actually a good green screen effect. And look at her eyes, especially. Which is just, like, it's a lovely little detail that tells us that she's overexcited and amateurish and doesn't really know what she's doing. And that's just, like, it's little touches like that endear me to her almost so instantly. And here we get a clever subversion right away. Now, the short and the characters that are going on here are very much relying on stock archetypes. Like, Jinx is the sort of ditzy, halfway insane, crazy mechanic person. Malphite is the big dumb bruiser, and Yasuo is sort of the almost like supernaturally calm and collected, sensible space samurai, whatever the hell is going on with him. But there's also a subversion there that Malphite is... It's a classic thing where Malphite is the big dumb guy who's, like, good at punching things, but he's also someone who apparently cares about building miniature bottle spaceships up until that goes wrong, at which point he cares about smashing miniatures, bottle spaceships. But you get this sense, okay, so Malphite is not just a one-note character, he has at least 2 notes. And that's... When you have such little time to do character introductions, like this is a 2-minute short, and this is probably going to be like a 45-minute video, like doing those little things, those little implying that there's just a little bit more to it than meets the eye, is a very good way to get us to care about these characters, because it tells us that Malphite is someone who it might be worth getting to know, because there might be more going on there than you think. And it's very much the same thing with Yasuo. As Jinx introduces him, nothing phases this guy. She throws a doll at him, he cuts it in half, and resumes reading us though nothing had happened, like the very embodiment of the sort of serene Jedi Master. We zoom in on his face, one of the few competent camera moves that Jinx makes at all during the course of this short, and we get this lovely shot of Yasuo, completely serene, unaffected, calm, didn't even really notice that he just hit super space ninja moves on a doll that's now been cut to pieces. Barely affected, nothing has happened, until he turns the page, and... So what we get with Yasuo is, on the one hand, the disaffected, sort of emotionally stable, calm, collected space captain, but also someone who will turn the page of a trashy romance novel and go, oh, scandalous, right? And so you get, okay, he's not a one-note character, he's at least a 2-note character, which I think it's just a really good way to do things. As for Jinx herself, I mean, the character animation is just brilliant, and we're going to be talking about that in a moment. Like I say, the camera is acting kind of as an extension of Jinx's character, because the ways in which she handles that, this is the simplest camera shot in the universe, and she cannot get the horizon line right, alright? She's always a little bit off kilter, she's always a little bit tilted, she's always got a slightly skewed perspective on things, which is a really good way to communicate that. And also, speaking of the ways in which the camera is used, let's see if we can find... late in the short, as we see here. Yeah, see, there's this transition where finally Yasuo has kind of had enough of Jinx. Like, they're in combat, they're being chased by a space monster, and she just cares about making this recruitment video. So Yasuo is like, okay, let's deal with this situation here. And all of a sudden, the camera becomes our only perspective. Jinx's perspective falls away, and it is not until this moment, when Jinx's control of the camera, where Jinx's control of the perspective is taken away, that we really get to see the universe. Like, this is the first time we really get to see the universe, literally. We get to see the size of the ship, we get to see the glorious starfields and nebulas through which they travel, and we get to see the monster that's chasing them down, introduced previously in the short. But like that, from a filmmaking perspective, that's just a really good way to go about things, because we have this moment where the control of the perspective is finally taken away from Jinx, and with the perspective taken away from her, we can transition it seamlessly into the perspective of Sona, who acts as our audience POV character, going, what the hell just happened here? We need some time to digest what's going on. And it's just, from a filmmaking perspective, it's very, very clever. And just very well done. Like, Blur Studios have done an absolutely bang-up job of just putting this together from a technical perspective, of making sure that the characters feel interesting and fun and worthwhile to be around from the first moment that they appear on screen. Like, that's why it's important that the first thing that happens here is that Jinx is taping over some footage of Malphite's birthday, because it tells us they throw birthday parties for Malphite, and he sits with his little adorable hat on and waits for cake, and he's very happy and enjoys himself a lot. He's someone who likes to have fun, and they like to have fun alongside him, and that tells us something about their relationship as a crew. Character relationships are the way, at least for me, character relationships are always the way to introduce a really high concept universe, and that's the mistake I think I see a lot of writers do. when they have this fantastic idea for this really cool sci-fi or fantasy universe or whatever, and they kind of get caught up in explaining how it all works and how it all fits together, and here's the Empire, and here's the bad guys, and here's the good guys, and here's how the magic works, and here's how the science works, and here's how all the stuff works, and here's how all the pieces move around, and they kind of get obsessed with this narrative chess game of defining all the premises for what's going on. And this short takes what I believe is the much stronger approach, and it says, no, who cares about how the universe works? That's not really interesting. Here's some characters, here's how they relate to each other. We can explain the rest along the way. Which is also the whole point of the whole Kane scene, is that first of all, like, he's mowing down tons of robots just to demonstrate that he's a dangerous, unstoppable badass, right? So we're setting the stakes that, okay, this guy can take down like a small army of combat robots by himself. He's dangerous. They need to get the hell away from him for pretty obvious reasons. But it's, again, what it's really about is establishing character relationships, because Kane sees the camera, he picks it up, and he's about to do a supervillain rant to the camera. You have taken what is mine, but I shall find you and I shall... And then... Nope, that's not what it's about now, Kane. This is about Jinx's relationship to you and your relationship to the crew, because Jinx thinks you're just the coolest guy in the goddamn universe. She has a little crush on you because you can do incredibly cool violence and make stuff blow up, even though you are the villain. Oh, hey, that's a really cool hero-villain dynamic that's being established here. That's really interesting. I want to see where that goes, right? So in terms of just making the characters... implying that there's a story there that's worth following. This thing is doing absolutely gangbusters. Anyway, character animation, and the bit I wanted to talk about in particular that does a really good job of showing us... I mean, first of all, there's this. That's just a really, really good moment, because it's so melodramatic, right? This is the kind of thing that you would see in like a reality show where the camera zooms in and a character does this very overwrought "oh my" expression. It feels really kind of staged or put on or a little bit fake, but the animation sells it that this is something that this particular guy would do unironically, which I think is quite good. Anyway, Jinx's character animation. I could spend hours talking about this. Blur Studios have, like, whoever was the lead animator on Jinx deserves like a medal or something, because this is just such a lovely piece of character animation. Because see how she relates to the camera, right? Like, she takes her eyes off the camera just for a sec in order to pick up her weapon, but then see how she looks back at it, like... It's a really good moment of establishing a connection. I also love how they handle the weight of the rocket launcher, because it would be very easy, because it looks like it's made of plastic, which, like, a lot of this thing looks like it's made of plastic, so having Jinx do this kind of hauling motion to get it up over her shoulder, and it kind of puts her off balance. It tells us something about her relationship to the weapon, that she's maybe running around with weapons that are a little bit too big and heavy for her, that maybe she can't quite handle all the explosive power that's present in in this bazooka. But it also helps sell the weight of the weapon, which is really, really important, especially when it comes to space technology. One of the things that happened in the original Avengers back in the day, when we see Thor and Loki and like all the Asgardian technology and stuff like that, because the lighting and because because those props were made of plastic in real life, you could kind of tell that when characters were moving them around, they weren't really heavy. They weren't really made of like heavy metal of any kind, and it's sort of they looked like a little bit like cosplay props. And a lot of that comes down to weight. A thing needs to move with a believable inertia and weight in order to feel realistic in the world. And that's something that the animators seem to have paid really special attention to, especially when it comes to Jinx handling her rocket launcher, which makes it feel more real, which makes her interaction with it feel more real. Anyway, character animation. I keep wanting to talk about character animation and getting distracted. Like, look at this little moment as she finally hoists the rocket launcher over her shoulder, like, and you can see this moment where she goes, "Oh, I love the weight of this thing." And then, first she does the cool pose, like, right? Yeah, I'm a rocket launcher. Yeah, I'm a cool... And then she does that thing. And again, Jinx's personality is coming across so well, and she moves so rapidly, and she can go through these extremely outsized, powerful expressions very rapidly without ever seeming unnatural. And that's, by the way, something that came up on, I think I saw it on the boards at some point. People were kind of concerned that they had made some substantial changes to Jinx's character design, which I don't really think they have at all. Like, at all. But I think it was this shot in particular. Yeah, that got brought up. See, because they have done some changes to Jinx's character model. So, in Get Jinxed, we see this version of her. And the primary difference from this to how she looks in the Odyssey skins, first of all, I think she's gotten a little bit more curvy. And a little bit, like, there's a little bit more muscle on her compared to the extremely skinny version of Jinx that we see in the Get Jinxed short. They've also made her eyes just a little bit smaller in relationship to her head, I believe. But the most striking things that they've done is that they have lengthened her nose. Like, there's much smaller distance from, you know, the end of her nose to the top of her upper lip than there is with this version of Jinx. And there's also a much stronger jawline on this version of Jinx. She has a lot more chin going on than she does in this one. And I think it's not, I don't think it's like a herald of this is how Jinx is going to look from now on. I think it's more a thing of they wanted to be able to do expressions like, where the hell is it? Somewhere around here. They wanted to be able to do expressions like these, like that one, for instance, where you really do need that powerful chin and that extra curvature around the cheek in order to really, like this expression especially. I think that would be kind of hard to sell with a face that is, oops, that was the wrong command. Damn it. I hate hotkeys sometimes. I think a face like this, full of motion blur, would be really hard to sell with this particular character model, because this character model is a lot rounder, it's a lot smoother, it's a lot more, it's a lot less specific. And that means that there's a limit to how much you can distort it. Like, because when you have something that is so round and smooth and perfect, the more you distort it, the more it looks like the character is off model. But if you have something that is already a little bit more bulgy, that has a few more bulges and a little bit more three-dimensionality to it, you can do more extreme expressions on it without feeling like you're breaking the model. And I personally like it, because like it just fits the animation style that they've chosen for this thing. Like, because this kind of crazy expression, like, look how much the jaw is bending around in order to accommodate that very wide-mouthed, open thing that I really don't think you could have done with the other character model, which is why they've done it that way. God damn it, hotkeys. Speaking of character animation, here's one of the cool action shots that are in this thing. As Jinx throws the doll. Now, there's a lot of motion blur going on, which kind of sucks, so it's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on. But what I really like is that Yasuo puts the book down, draws the sword, pulls the book up after him, like, through the motion of the sword slash. He pulls the book up and brings it up to his face, and he starts reading again in mid-air. And then he lands, swings the sword around. He never stops reading the book. It's right here, and finally he looks at the doll, gives it a slice, gives it a second, and a third. And his attention is already back on the book. By the time he's spinning around like this, you can see he's already here. He turns his attention to the book as the doll spins around in midair. He sheaths the sword down on his knees, never missing a beat. And I do love the approach to physics that becomes evident in this little shot here, because the doll, while Yasuo is moving with, you know, more immediate physics, the doll does that little Acme Roadrunner hanging in the air for just one more second in order to make the joke land thing. And I think as an aesthetic approach to physics, that's a really good way to go, because it tells you something about how this universe relates to itself. This universe does not obey conventional laws of physics. This universe obeys comedy laws of physics, and I really like that. I also really like this little detail. As Yasuo and Malphite fist bump, boom, Malphite fist bumps Yasuo a little bit too hard, and he gets pushed back on his knees, on his feet a little bit. And that's such a lovely detail about their relationship as characters as well, that Yasuo and Malphite have this nice one, bro, relationship. They have this friend relationship. But we also get to see that Malphite maybe doesn't always quite know how to control his strength, and that Yasuo is kind of happy to just yield to it. Like, he doesn't resist. He doesn't push back against Malphite using too much strength. He just kind of, whoa, you pushed me a little hard there, buddy, and then he kind of lets it go. Again, the character motions, the character behavior tells us a lot about the relationships that these characters have to each other. and I really like it. I also really like just the thing that's going on with the fight, which is kind of hard to catch when you're just watching it normally because you're kind of focused on Jinx, you're focusing on the camera movement, but the thing that's going on here is that the plant monster has caught Malphite by the legs, and Yasuo is in the process of trying to save him. Which, again, is just such a lovely little background detail that that's what's going on here, is that Yasuo is trying to save his friend. Which is, again, demonstrating what I mean when I say that this thing is all about character relationships. And by the way, something else that's really difficult is that I talked a lot about how the camera is kind of a character, and the camera is never really properly in focus. It's never really properly aligned with the horizon line and stuff like that because Jinx is a terrible cameraman. The difficult trick that the people at the animation studio pulled off here is that in spite of Jinx being a terrible camera person, she accidentally, air quotes, accidentally creates really good shots. This is a really cool dynamic action shot of the kind that a director who was competent would use in order to show action. Fancy that, but at the same time, it's also kind of off-kilter and everything's kind of off-center, and they're using the rock formation in the background as kind of a frame to draw the viewer's eye to the action that's going on here. So, like, it manages this fusion of making really good shots happen seemingly on accident, although, of course, there's no accident involved in it at all. Anyway, I think I've gushed for long enough about this thing. So the final thing I wanted to mention is this. As far as I can tell, and I may be wrong, like it may be cell shading effects that's going on there, but as far as I can tell, the smoke and indeed the rocket and the explosion that happens all looks like it's 2D hand animation. And one of the ways I feel like I can tell is because see how the smoke moves relative to the background, right? The smoke doesn't follow the camera movement quite correctly, which tells me that this is something that's been 2D animated and then overlaid on the 3D animation afterwards, later down the line. And again, but it's not all the smoke effects that are hand animated, and certainly not all liquid effects and stuff like that are hand animated, but sometimes this short will use hand animated things in order to get certain things across, which also something that happens when, here for example, Kain using his ultimate on this robot here. See how the frame rate of the effects that are happening around the scythe aren't completely synchronized with the frame rate of what's going on with the robot. You can see it moves on a slightly different timing, and you can see these things kind of, sometimes you can see here, for instance, there's this moment where the effects just kind of hover in place, which is the kind of thing that it's a limited animation technique, which tells me that these effects were possibly hand animated, which is part of why they have this really satisfying, cartoonish, powerful effect going on, because it's borrowing a lot from especially anime style effects animation, which is all generated to have maximum visual impact with a minimum amount of frames. And the combination of those two things works really well. You can really see it here as Kain dashes out of the creature, or out of the robot. You can see these speed line streaks that are hanging around everywhere, and the lightning that goes along behind him. And this is at 1080p, by the way. I can't put it up to any higher quality settings. This is just what YouTube compression does to a video. Also, there's artificial compression added in because we're seeing it through the eyes of a camera. Anyway, they're all seem to be hand animated to me, or at the very least generated with some very clever algorithms. And that combination of 2D and 3D aesthetics is something that we also saw prominently displayed in the Get Jinxed short. You can in fact see it in this shot right here, how the smoke effects from her explosion and from her gun are all hand animated, or at least 2D animated, on top of the motions of the 3D model. And it works really well. It gives it a very distinctive sense of feel in the things that are going on, where some physical effects, like for instance all the sparks and all the stuff that's flying around afterwards, that is absolutely 3D generated, but the cool fight stuff, like the cool anime fight explosion effects, are all generated with the same kind of animation technique that produces those effects in a 2D piece of animation. And it's just, I've always been a complete sucker for combinations of 2D and 3D animation disciplines, because it's for me, it always creates these wonderful, interesting dynamic effects. And I believe it also shows up as the Odyssey. Yeah, you can see it here as well, as the Odyssey jumps to hyperspeed, or whatever the hell it's called. You can see here as well these hand-animated anime lightning effects and stuff like that, kind of really selling the impact of what's going on there. It's really quite nice. Like, I don't really have anything but praise for this animated short. My criticism, rather, is that Riot has a tendency to do things like this and then not do a great job of following up on it. And that's one of the things that's frustrating about being a League fan, is that you'll get something like this, which sets up this wonderful universe with these cool characters and this incredibly distinctive visual sort of affectation going on, and like lots of implied story, lots of implied lore going on, and then they get released as skins, and then we never see anything from them ever again until some more skins get released into the same universe. But it's not going to be like an animated short for them. It's going to be, I don't know, a comic or something that put out. And that's always the trouble with Riot, is that they are really, really bad at following up on the things that they set up in beforehand, because these character introductions are so good. They imply so much in terms of deeper relationships to explore, of like future events that can unfold that would be just interesting and kind of fun to hang out with, and then they don't let us explore them or hang out with the characters. So, I mean, here's hoping, but historically, there's reason to be pessimistic about whether we get to hang out with these characters ever again after this. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, there's a like button down below for that very purpose. If you haven't enjoyed this video, there's also a dislike button that you can click on. And I'm a little bit out of practice with making up dislike button stories. I want you to pretend at this point in the video that I have made up a really interesting, weird-ass, quirky dislike button story about how it's like some sci-fi creature in disguise that when you click on it, it's gonna unfold and it's gonna have lots of legs and it's gonna bite your hands off or something like that. Just imagine that I did that and go down into the comments and say, oh, hey bro, that was the best dislike button story ever, and I'd be very grateful for that, and I'd try to get my muscles working and so I can come up with a better one for the next video. Anyway, if you want to support the channel and these videos on Patreon, I would be very grateful for the support. It really does help me out. I just finished a really big video project that took me a hell of a long time, and that just, I literally would not have been able to do that, like financially been able to spend that much time on a video project if not for the support on Patreon. Like, literally, YouTube's algorithm does not like it when you don't upload videos for a while, because one of them is taking a while to produce. So if you want to support me on Patreon, I'm very grateful for the help. $1 a month is more than enough. If you give $1 a month to any YouTuber on patreon.com, you're literally worth like a couple of thousand views. That's like the scale of how little we generally earn from ads. Yeah. If not, that's fine. Like, you have watched the video, maybe you're gonna share it with someone or not. It's fine. Like, just watching the video is enough. Sometimes I get messages from people who feel bad about not supporting on Patreon. Don't. It's okay. It's fine. It's okay. It's there for people who have $1 they're fine with. I'm so unused to doing these ramble videos because I've been stuck in scripting and editing for so long, so this is all gone completely wrong at the end, which I suppose is in the spirit of the animated short itself, because it's about characters who are kind of silly, and I'm gonna stop talking now. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, good lord.